welcome to another episode of Roundtable Conversations, where we promote the art of listening. And we have today the illustrious, wonderful Veronica. And today's topic is going to be #metoo. We're going to discuss the movement, its merits, where it could stand to improve. And before we jump right to it, I'm going to remind everybody of our Roundtable rules. So our mission statement is that we are intent on spreading the roundtable spirit and technique of creating a common pool of meaning and conversation, especially of divisive topics like Me Too. In short, we would like to promote the art of listening. Our rules are as follows. Following. All participants in the roundtable are equal in importance. One person speaks at a time. When not speaking, members are focused on paying full attention to what is being said and understanding what is trying to be communicated, both logically and emotionally. You don't have to agree, but we strive to understand the other point of view. We always add to the common pool of knowledge. We never negate, never argue. If Veronica claims that the sky is blue and I'm confident that the sky is actually yellow, then I don't say, I think Veronica is wrong, or I disagree with Veronica. Rather, I just say, I believe that the sky is yellow, and let the audience decide what they will. And when we speak, we talk according to the question. There's going to be questions each round, according to the question that was asked, and we take into consideration people's attention span. We're going to have 2-minute turns. There's going to be a bell ring at the end of every 2 minutes, which will let us, give us a couple of seconds to finish up and then pass the baton onwards. And without any further ado, let's jump right to it. So question number 1, Me Too. What does sexual harassment mean to you?
Putting that question to me first.
Would you like to start, or would you like me to start today?
Up to you. I'm happy to go first. What does it mean to me? I'm working right now with a group of men and women on Me Too, and I'm teaching a 4-week workshop, and I'm there as much to teach as I am to learn. And I'm really finding it varies from person to person. So people don't have a uniform definition of what harassment is like. I think one of the things that I'm really starting to tune into is we need to have a more intuitive culture. We need to be able to read each other. So let's say I offer somebody a hug and one person feels pressured to give me a hug in return, and another person feels really comforted and seen and loved by the fact that I offered a hug. That first person might actually think that I'm kind of harassing them, trying to encroach on their boundaries. And the other person might see me as being very generous and loving. And because everybody's got different perceptions, I think, yes, we can have certain standards about, if you cross this line, that's definitely harassment. And particularly in the workplace, we need to be able to have that. And legally, perhaps in the street. But when it comes to interpersonal relationships, I don't think we're going to be able to have a definite definition of that's harassment and that's just flirting, that's harassment and that's just being friendly. I think instead we're going to have to move towards trying to ascertain how the other person perceives it. And if it doesn't work for them, well, then it's harassment for them. That doesn't mean that we lose our jobs or go to jail. But it does mean that we actually need to be a little more sensitive about what works for other people. I'm thinking about a friend who recently was offended because somebody was taking pictures of, I'll just finish up here, taking pictures of their babies at a public gathering. And she felt encroached upon. The other person said, well, you're in the public, so I get to take pictures of you. And I think maybe we need to move away from violating other people's sense of space just because we think we're legally empowered to do it. That's my answer right now.
Yeah, I feel this is a tricky question. Definitely, I feel that this is relative. It is relative to the environment that you are in. I feel the rules of engagement might be different, in a more conservative country in the Middle East versus the United States or Russia. I feel also within the US, for example, if you are in a nightclub, like the rules are certain, and if you're if we'll take an extreme example, in a swingers club or whatever the case may be, then you take it to the extreme, then the rules there are also different. So it's very much like you said, there's it's domain specific. It depends on the circumstance. However, when you start moving towards litigation and wanting to create a movement and wanting to fight against sexual harassment, I think that compels you to actually start having a conversation about it. I think it's important to actually have a conversation about it in the public sphere to define definitions. Because if you're talking about what are the rules of engagement at a workplace, at a place of education, etc., then or on the street, and if you're actually interested in having consequences to misbehavior, then at that point you are compelled to have a conversation and to define boundaries. What is sexual harassment? What are the sexual mores and codes that we have in different areas? Like, what is okay behavior in the workplace? Can I come in a bathrobe to work, or can I come in a tank top, or can I come with lipstick, or can I come with, or what is okay to say and what isn't? So I feel like definitely it's not clear cut. It depends on the situation, but also if we want to actually create a better society, if we want to address this issue, then we have to be honest with ourselves and actually have a conversation about it and reach all kinds of agreements and definitions about each specific place, whether it's at a workplace by workplace basis, or whether we try to have a conversation about it as a nation, as a society, and agree on rules that are generally accepted amongst general society for things like workplace or a governmental place or a place of education that's governmentally funded, etc. But I feel inherently what sexual harassment is a sexual advance that is unwelcome. But I'll finish the sentence and thought, but it's more nuanced than that, because it could be unwelcome, but it's not meant as, the person who's making this sexual harassment isn't trying to force himself on somebody else. He just doesn't know that it's unwelcome. He makes the advance. It's unwelcome. If that's where it stops, I feel that more often than not, it would be fine. There has to be some kind of acceptance of how we're going to approach each other, unless you want to say that we're going to revert back to prearranged marriages and call it a day. That is my time.
So there's a couple of things that came to mind while you were talking, and I agree that we have to have conversations. Absolutely, we have to have conversations, and that's one of the things you and I are doing. We're having a conversation about this. That's what I'm also doing with this mixed gender group that I'm facilitating right now, having these conversations. I think that I was just reading about the sexual harassment charges against Neil deGrasse Tyson. And it was, now one of them is a rape. So, and I don't have much information on that. The woman who claims she was raped hasn't provided a lot of details. And Neil deGrasse Tyson's rebuttal was, I thought, pretty lame too. So, but I'm just going to focus on the creepy stuff that supposedly happened. And in fact, there's some photos to support that it did happen in one case where he was checking out this woman's tattoo on her arm, which went under her dress. And he moved her dress so that he could see the tattoo. And she felt creeped out about it. And so she ends up coming back several years to talk about it. And for her, this is her Me Too moment. She may have other Me Too moments. I don't know. For me, I think that there's a couple things that come up here for me. One is that women have got a lot of times a different idea about what feels sexually harassing to them, because just being in proximity with men that are bigger and stronger on average can feel a little intimidating. And if the woman feels like she's being looked at in a certain way, then if the man says something or touches her, it takes it up quite a bit. It raises the temperature. And when I look at male culture, I think that men are chronically touch deprived. They are living in a world where they are almost automatically assumed to be a perpetrator. And they shouldn't hang around children's schoolyards. And they have to be very careful about touching each other, lest they be seen as, homosexual. And so I think sometimes when men are trying to engage with women, they may touch and sexualize that interaction, even unconsciously, because that becomes the only acceptable way for men to reach out to women, which I think is really unfortunate. So, my time.
Definitely, I feel there's room to explore healthy outlets for touch in our lives in general, and for men specifically. I think in today's society in the West, as the size differential is less of an issue than it was, in an ancient world, or even in today's world in less civilized societies. There's definitely a lot of power that's just shifted towards women. Like, the accusations can get men's life derailed, and most men, I feel, aren't inclined to aggression towards women. There is a minority of men who definitely is systematically inclined towards aggression. I think they perpetrate the great vast cases of assault. But if we're talking about harassment, I think most often not, it's just some kind of miscommunication or misunderstanding. It's also a lot of times it's like maybe the narrative changes after the fact. Maybe when it happened, it was fine and felt fine, but after the fact, the person talks with their friends or whatever the case may be, and people think about it different. I mean, I know I also personally have experienced a lot of times where women touched me in more intimate ways, and I was pretty fine with it more often than not. Sometimes they felt like it was a bit too much, both men with women. So I take it upon myself the responsibility to set that boundary, to step aside. So it's a twofold. It's, on the one hand, yes, there's a lot of room for people to be more emotionally intelligent and socially intelligent, to understand, okay, what I'm doing now is not pleasant to whoever I'm engaging with, and scale it down. But I think it's also like the flip side of that is people have to learn to be more clear with their boundaries. Excuse me, that this is unpleasant, please don't do that, and that's the end of it, and be okay with that, because we're always going to clash if we're going to interact with each other. We don't want to live in a world where everybody's just behind their screens and safe from the world. And there's always a balance, I feel, between safety and freedom. And I want the freedom to engage with other people, but I also want the safety not to be murdered for doing so. And somewhere in the middle, there's that balancing act. Ultimately, I think sexual harassment is a sexually undesirable advance. And I think it becomes harassment. I think the crucial point that differentiates a misunderstanding maybe from harassment is when somebody continues engaging in that activity, even though it was made clear that it is undesired.
Well, so listening to your definition, some of the thoughts that come to my mind are Chris Rock. The comedian Chris Rock used to say, sexual harassment is just what happens to ugly guys. And by his joke, he meant that if the woman did not appreciate the advance and wasn't interested in that man, well, then he gets accused of sexual harassment. If he is attractive to her and he's proffering some kind of sexual advance, it's not harassment. So I feel like there is that has to be addressed on some level. If some man that you have a lot of attraction to does something like maybe follow your tattoo up your arm, it could be a hot moment that you go home and tell all your friends about. But if you're not sexually attracted to that man, then it can kind of creep you out. And there's also the fact that some guys come across a little creepy in the way that they make their sexual advances. There's something self-referential about it, kind of clueless. They're not paying attention to the woman's body language, and sometimes even a little bit desperate or needy. And some guys, I think they've gotten so used to that channel that the way that they come on to a woman is almost to see what they can get by with. They're trying to encroach on boundaries, kind of like a naughty boy. And then if they get by with it, they feel kind of like they scored something, you know, and that's as far as they're going to get probably, because they've got that kind of energy and that attitude. So, and I think women are kind of sensitive to that and notice that and don't appreciate it. If a guy is paying a little more attention to whether or not his advances are being welcomed or received, then he's probably less likely to get accused of harassment. So.
Yeah, I agree. Definitely. The issue here at hand is whether it's wanted or not. Because if you go to extreme sex, if it's wanted, then it's sex. If it's unwanted, it's rape. So the same thing with any sexual advance. If it's a wanted touch, it's a pleasant memory. If it's an unwanted touch, it's harassment. I think we have to have some clear boundaries because, again, not everybody have the same level of emotional and social intelligence, and that's just the facts. So I think touch is a definitely important boundary. I think people should be a little bit less fragile. Sticks and stones can break my bones and whatnot. Obviously, if something is continuous and very, very lurid, that's one thing. But if somebody said something offhandedly and it didn't land well, it is what it is. But once you touch other people, that's definitely a certain boundary. That was an elevation, like as far as intimacy that you're allowing yourself. So I think at that point, people should be more sensitive to what they're doing and what they're not doing. But then again, touch is a part of day-to-day. I am shocked that in today's America, male teachers can't hug their children, their child students. It seems very, very wrong to me because children need touch, they need affection. And it's like, it's all a balancing act, and there has to be this conversation about it. So like I said, I think you have to have a conversation in every place specifically, and I agree with you that people have to be educated better and practice better. I think there's all kinds of healthy outlets where people can practice touch in a good way. I dance personally, I do couples dancing. I can't recommend it enough because it's like a safe place to practice a lot of the elements of flirtation. But it's like a game. But that is the push pull, the thing, like the fundamental dynamics of dance. At least the dance that I do, I engage in West Coast, is basically analogous to flirtation. And I feel like there's a lot of people who come there who are kind of like from very brainy professions. There's programmers and people like that who come there, and I think it provides them a very good place to explore their bodies and connecting with other people and having that communication that's not just very intellectual. I think it's a good time to move to our next question.
Yeah.
Do you think that sexual harassment and misbehavior are common in society today?
Absolutely. I mean, if there's anything the Me Too moment has really highlighted for all of us women, is that we have all been enduring some kind of sexual harassment almost on a daily basis. It happens in the street, it happens in the grocery store, it happens at the gym, it happens in the yoga class, it happens at work, it happens at church, at your AA meeting. It's just a daily occurrence. Now, it has different levels to it. It might be mild, it might be extreme, but sexual harassment, as women experience it and define it, is pretty much a very common experience. So, and that's come as a real shock to men. Men have been like, oh, that can't be. And I think we've got a difference of opinion about what sexual harassment is, which is why I like your idea about we need to have conversations, and it's why I'm having conversations in my local community and helping to facilitate those. Because I don't think men and women have the same definition of sexual harassment. For us, there's a lot of it going on, and it's repugnant, and it takes a toll on our psyches and our emotional landscape. But, I think that it's just something that we have got to open up the conversation about. There's a way in which men, I think, are trained away from being sensitive about the ways in which they may feel harassed. So like if some guy's not actually punching you in the face and giving you a black eye, I guess it doesn't count, right? And that's not the world that I want to live in. I don't want to live in a world where somebody actually has to forcibly rape me before I get a chance to say, I don't like how I'm being treated and I don't want to be touched in that way. And if you go back far enough in human history, that's exactly what it used to be. Women didn't have anything to complain about unless they were forcibly raped. And even then, it had to be a vaginal rape. So Me Too has really helped highlight the fact that there's a lot of ways in which women are being talked to and touched that they find offensive and damaging.
I think when you say about society today, like you really have to be cognizant that there's a lot of different societies today. The West is an amazing place to be in. There's a lot of places, Latin America, for instance, there's countries where even murder for women isn't taken very seriously. And in Russia, I've heard that domestic violence isn't something that the police will ever get involved with unless you reach murder, because it's their business. She's his wife. It's between them. So the level of safety that has been achieved in the West today is really, really astounding. And it's not that it's never been in history. Like if you learn history, then there's ups and webs. Like these things change. There were different times in the Roman Empire and other periods in history, different places. There were definitely places where women were more free, less free, more constrained, less constrained. It's been a shifting dynamic. But I think today in the West, it's relatively pretty good. And if a woman complains, especially in today's climate, it's definitely has effects on people's lives. So like there are protections. It's not like, oh, I'm weaker, I can't do anything. I think something that might be affecting a little bit of the way different people view this is, I think there's a minority of men that commit a majority of offenses. So a woman's experience going to life, she might experience, oh, I've been harassed here, 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 and here, but it's a very, very small minority of men. And a man's experience is like there's very, very little men around who actually engage in that. But if those men are active enough, it's the Pareto principle that's very, very common in the world in general. Like if, say, 20% of the men are responsible for 80% of the harassment, then 80% of the men are absolutely fine. But it still doesn't mean that there's a small amount of harassment. And I think that's something to be cognizant of when you're brushing like a whole people, a whole gender with the one brush. They're all predators or they're all harassers. I don't think that's the case. I think the case is that there are a minority of men who harass regularly. I think a lot of women experience that. I think there's also room for discussion of what is harassment. And another thing that we don't discuss much is that today's society is much more mixed than it was even 60 years ago. So there's a lot more of common spaces where men and women interact. Before World War II, there were much less women in the workforce in the United States, much less. And during the war and after the war, that reality shifted. And now we share all of these spaces, and we've never actually stopped and bothered to discuss what are the rules of engagement. You know, is saying a compliment okay or not okay? Is catcalling okay or not okay? Is dressing in a certain provocative way okay or not okay? Is it my freedom of expression? You know, like these are all conversations that need to be had, and I'm glad we're having them.
Well, I'm glad we're having them too. And it's interesting because I was listening to a young woman talk about how somebody whistling at her when she's walking down the street is sexual harassment. And I always thought it was a compliment. I love it when somebody whistles at me. Now, if there's a type of whistle that can feel really scary, and if it's followed with a certain kind of I don't know what you'd call it, it's kind of a yelping, whooping call, it can set your nerves on edge. Like you don't know if the car's going to stop and if somebody's going to jump out and try to grab you. But if somebody's just whistling an appreciation as they walk by or drive by, to me, they're going to really put a smile on my face. So I understand. I think there is even like a generational difference between women about what constitutes sexual harassment. Whereas I might be complimented, a younger woman might actually be offended or frightened. And I don't know what that means. The women that are older than me certainly tolerate sexual harassment that I won't tolerate. So generationally, women are becoming less and less tolerant of abusive patterns. To me, I'm like, ooh, do I really want to live in a world where we're not allowed to pay each other compliments? We're going to ban men from whistling if they see a woman that they find attractive. Not sure I actually want to live in that world, but I'm interested in having conversations with younger women to find out why they find that offensive. As far as whether or not there's a small percentage of men who sexually harass, I disagree with you, and that's just based on my experience and conversations that I've certainly had with lots and lots of women. It's usually very, very shocking to us how many men will sexually harass or overstep the line if given an opportunity. And all that really means when I say given an opportunity is proximity. Proximity and privacy. So he may be incredibly upstanding. He may have a feminist consciousness. He might be progressive and new agey, and yet here comes the sexual harassment, and it blindsides us over and over again. We're like, well, I didn't expect that from that guy, for God's sake, but there it is. That's my time.
I just want to remind the both of us that we don't negate or argue in the roundtable, so we just add our own point of view. So if I disagree with something that you've said, I'm just going to present my point of view.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that reminder.
Definitely, I think that if you talk about something like whistling, for instance, there's always the danger of like something that's predatory. And I think that's what you're referring to when you're saying it feels dangerous. Like definitely some men there's something predatory about the man chasing a woman. And some men are less socialized and civilized about that. And it definitely could be dangerous. And I think when you hear that, there's an instinctive chill that runs down your spine that warns you about it. And that's definitely unpleasant. I think a lot of the unpleasantness is your narrative about it. I think people don't like to feel objectified more often than not. They don't want to feel objectified by people they don't want to feel objectified by, or some people they don't feel comfortable with it at all. Some people in certain contexts where they do feel like an attraction or something do maybe want to feel objectified to some extent, but it's definitely not something that you would want to do to somebody without them being interested in. And I think some people register that whistle of you are an object, and it has a lot to do with the societal conversation. If 60 years ago spanking a woman on the tush at a workplace was something that was considered reasonable, today it's you rolling your eyes.
I am definitely rolling my eyes.
So there is a certain conversation and norms that are being evolving, but like I said, I feel that's a line that's kind of easy to draw, touch. Like, I think you should be very, very cognizant of this escalation once you've touched a person. But again, there is room for touch also in a society that engages with each other. I hug people that I'm friends with. I give a kiss on the cheek. And there is something very, very basic and human about that. And it's not only with my children, it's also with friends. And I think that's not something you want to discard because it has a room in human society. I don't know how many men, I don't have statistics about how many men sexually harass or don't. And I think a big part of that is that we don't actually have definitions. I do suspect, however, that it's less, I don't think it's the majority of men by any shape or form. I don't know what the number is. I don't know what the percentage is, so I can't really speak of it intelligently, but I definitely feel that sexual harassment and misbehavior in today's Western society is at an all-time low. I feel that it's improving, and I feel that we're open to conversation, which will lead us to continual improvement. Do you want to do another round about that, or do you want to go to the next question?
I'll just do one more round. Yeah, I think there's a big difference between the way women and men see this issue. I think for women, it's more about a lot of men sexually harass, not a small percentage. And the way I look at that as a sexologist is that we have got a cultural difference about what we define as sexual harassment. And that's why we need to have these conversations. I don't think that the vast majority of men believe that they sexually harass. I don't think that's their intention. I don't think that's their motivation. And yet I think that they absolutely are, according to the standards that matter to women. So we've got to start having these conversations about this. And the other thing I want to add to this, I have a prediction. My prediction is this: Me Too opens up the conversation where women are really getting honest about what hasn't been working for them for a long time. They're really fed up. They've had it. But it's going to boomerang, and that is not, I am absolutely thrilled about it, Me Too. I'm glad it's here, but it's going to turn into a much bigger conversation. And it's the way it's going to boomerang, and we've already seen some of this where some women have actually been accused of rape and sexually harassing interns on the job. And there's been such resistance to the idea that women are capable of sexual harassment too. But even in this class that I am teaching, I reached out and patted a man on the leg when I was talking to him. And I called myself out in front of the group. I said, "Did you notice that I just violated his boundaries?" And they all thought that I'd made that a teaching moment. And I said, no, that has to do with my entitlement as a woman, that I can touch anybody I want. And that's where I think culturally we're going to go in this direction of finding out that women have been very privileged around touch. And we've got a double standard in that department. Men are seen as perpetrators. Men can't touch, they can't hug. It's really, to me, just become really crippling towards the male psyche in a lot of ways. And at the same time, women are touching whoever they want, however they want. And I could see where that might feel like permission to men to be able to reciprocate. But when they do, they're a predator. And I'm not saying that I agree that they're a predator. I'm just saying there's that perception of it. So I even want to enlarge the conversation further and start talking about the ways that women touch others.
I agree. I think there's definitely an evolution of a double standard. I think it's great that you bring it up, because it's like we don't actually want to have a conversation about it. We want to have this outrage culture where we just string people up from the bulwarks and tar and feather them rather than actually discussing it. I think it's very fair. Touch is a part of human interaction. You do want people to feel their own safety, their own boundaries, whatever it is, but you also want the freedom to engage with each other. And there'll always be a bit of back and forth in every relationship. There's always a back and forth about where exactly the boundaries pass. And that's part of the experience. I think it's important to not be too quick to the gun to shoot people, metaphorically speaking, when that is being clarified. The trick is to define a boundary where, this is no longer cool. And I think it's fair to hold women also to the standards that you hold men about, and also to start thinking about what exactly standards do we want. Do we want there to be no hugs in the workplace, no touch in the workplace? Is that the world we want to do? No romance in the workplace? Because this is actual rules that are being laid out by some companies today. And it's even more than that, because it gets ridiculous at some point. And now at some college campuses, if people are drunk, it's automatically rape. So if both parties are drunk, they've raped each other basically, and people will very seriously, it sounds funny, but people seriously said, yes, they raped each other. And then you hear a case of a couple hooking up, and then the guy in the morning waking up and saying, oh shit, I'm in trouble because she was drunk and I was drunk. So he goes to complain about her that she raped him, and she got thrown off of campus before she manages to do the same thing. And it sounds funny, but people's lives are getting ruined. So to summarize, I think that it's not as common as people make it out to be, but we're kind of redefining it, in the nature of the land is also shifting. So there's also room to define it according to the new reality. And I think that's a positive thing. I think a conversation is due, but I don't think we should sound hysterical fire alarms indiscriminately just yet. Some places definitely could use a lot of work. Hollywood is one of them. The music industry is a lot of them. Places where people are very, very entitled, and there is these twisted cultures. I think there is definitely a problem. I think the casting couch in Hollywood and the music industry, R. Kelly and such, cases of clear abuse and harassment that have been going on for years, and everybody has been turning a deaf eye and a deaf ear. I think that's definitely cases. Though there's certain cultures and environments where sexual harassment and misbehavior are ridiculously common and should be addressed and uprooted. I don't think it is true to say that that is the reality all across the West. And I think we'll move on to our next question. And our next question is, how do you define a safe, respectful society?
Well, the safe, respectful society that I would like to live in is not touch phobic, because I think first and foremost, we are primates and we require touch. It's important. And frankly, it's just mammals. You don't have to be a primate to need so many hugs. My dog needs touch. You know, we just, as mammals, we need touch. So I don't want to live in a world where we don't touch. And I certainly don't want to live in a world where where I'm subjected to unwanted touch. I've been in sex positive communities that just have no boundaries at all. And it's, for me, somebody who's a sexual abuse survivor, it's unnerving, and I just won't go. I just leave those kind of communities. I need to be in communities where there are good boundaries. And I think a lot of women feel that way. Certainly women have endured a higher rate of sexual molestation and rape than men. And that is something, you know, if you follow epigenetics, PTSD is actually in our genes, and it goes from generation to generation. So there's a lot of women who are very sensitive in a PTSD sort of way, even if they personally haven't been sexually assaulted, because somebody in their gene line has been. So that's just a very real thing for women. And I think that if we have better communication and better boundary assertion and more attention to paying, honoring those boundaries, if we're to be able to develop a culture that asserts boundaries, honors boundaries, and is more intuitive, that we could move towards a culture that is actually has more affection, more touch, more connection. And that would be the world that I want to live in. And so if somebody feels violated by my hug, I don't want to hug them. But how do I find out how they feel about that? How do I make sure that I don't make them feel pressured to have that hug? And where is their responsibility for communicating the fact that they maybe have weak boundaries or don't know how to communicate their no? So I'm actually teaching people, and I'm writing a book about this, how to say your no. I want people to be able to deliver a no that creates heart connection. Just teaching people how to assert boundaries is not going to do it, because we all want connection. And so people sometimes violate their own boundaries to try to maintain connection.
I think defining a safe, respectful society is important. It's especially important in light of the previous question. Are we in is there an issue with the society of today? So you have to define what is a safe, respectful society. Do catcalling exist in that society? Do you get thrown in prison for catcalling? Do hugs exist in schools in that kind of society? Don't they? You know, like it's always like there's this balance between freedom and safety, and they're like at polar opposites. It's most safe in a way where there's least freedom, where you're not allowed out of the house until marriage, but you want that freedom, and then you venture out into a dangerous world where there are dangers. I think a safe, respectful society starts with the second part. It starts with respect. It starts with honoring other people. I think if we have this idealist schema of individuals are valuable, individuals are important, individuals' desires and wants are of value, which is not a given in every single society on earth today or in the past, then that's a good place to start. Just this idea that we should respect people's desires and wants, that people have value, intrinsic value. That's already a big place to start. And that's kind of like the important place to start with. And after you start from that place, how do people feel comfortable? And everybody are trying to respect other people's space, comfort, etc. To an extent that is reasonable, again, in a place where we live and engage together. I think that's a good place to start. And you have to have a little bit of patience towards people, and a clarity when something is uncomfortable. Again, I'm going to bring the analogy of dance. So when you go to a social dance, then there's, every song you switch a partner. So there's a lot of dancing with a lot of different people. And it's very clear in that situation where some people feel much more comfortable and desiring of more intimate, more close, more close and intimate, like kind of a dance. And some people feel uncomfortable with it. And if you are looking out for that, then it's very reasonable to adjust to it. And there's some followers that I feel want to be very close and they enjoy that intimacy, and that's what it is for them. And some people want it more reserved and more distance and less intimate. And sometimes maybe you're off, and sometimes that you have a good relationship will tell you that's a bit too close for me, and that's and I personally appreciate it very much. I said no problem, and I just chill it out a bit. I just give them more space. I think that respect is the place to start. A society where people respect each other and view each other as humans and individuals are valuable is a good place to start.
I think I want to make sure the viewers hear about something else that I think is a great place to learn how to touch with consent. They're called cuddle parties. And they were developed by a friend and colleague of mine by the name of Reid Mihalko. And the first one that I ever attended was being facilitated by another friend and colleague of mine, Betty Martin. And Betty Martin actually teaches something called the Wheel of Consent. And your viewers can go over and just find Wheel of Consent. And Betty Martin has all these amazing videos about what consent looks like or what it can look like. It's pretty complicated, kind of high level stuff that is mostly being taught to sex educators. But it's still worth a look, and I brought that material into my teachings from my classes. The cuddle party, one of the things I love about the cuddle party, you don't need to be educated in any way, shape, or form. You just show up at a cuddle party, and the facilitator will lay out the ground rules. And you don't have to cuddle with anybody. That if you want to use a place to be. And then if you do want touch, you get to specify touch and for how long. And I think it's just a great opportunity for people to be close to each other, connected to each other, and learning to have these amazing boundaries. So I highly recommend it. Again, that's called cuddle parties. So, and I want to have a world where people can touch each other, but with consent. And I don't want that consent to look rigid or stiff. Some of what I hear is happening on campuses sounds pretty, I don't know, it just doesn't sound very romantic. And it's one of the things that I'm working with the group that I'm facilitating. How do we find a romantic version of consent? What does that look like? So I right now am practicing asking before I hug people. In the past, I have sometimes just opened my arms like I'm available for a hug, and I'm realizing that that can sometimes create a sense of pressure where people feel like they have to hug me. So I'm working on the idea of just simply saying, I'm offering a hug if that feels good to you, and then let them decide. That's my time.
Yeah. How do you define a safe, respectful society? I think first of all, like the idea that people have agency is very important, and I think we've achieved that pretty well in the West. It doesn't matter if you're married to somebody or you've had relations in the past or whatever the case. There is the idea today in law that you're not entitled to anybody else's body just for whatever reason. There has to be the idea of consent. So that's a very, very good place to start because it's not an obvious place to start. People are always comparing to some imagined ideal, but I think the real thing to compare to is to other examples into the past. So I think that's a very, very positive thing. I think it's important for respect to have some touch, like you do, and I think it's important to be both patient with it on the receiving end and considerate on the giving end. So if I'm going to touch, if I'm offering touch, like you said, then to see how it lands and to scale it back or to continue if it's pleasantly accepted. I think a society that is considerate of each other is a great place to start. And I think we're doing not a bad job. Like I said, there's definitely enclaves in society today that are twisted. I think a lot of it has to do with like places where there's dominance hierarchies where people are placed on a very high pedestal. So it's like the modern equivalent of a king, and people won't say anything even if they see, like Harvey Weinstein or R. Kelly, etc. And I think there's definitely room for us as a society to look ourselves in the mirror and say, yeah, this is not right. But in general, I feel like in corporate America, it's even went overboard in schools, etc. In most spaces, I think people are really trying to be respectful and provide a pleasant environment and a safe environment for everybody. Let's move on to the next question. I think it's one that you're going to appreciate. What do you think was positive about the hashtag #MeToo movement?
I love Me Too. I absolutely love it. And I believe it has a lot of limitations right now. But here's what I love about it. I love the fact that women are rising into a place of empowerment, of being able to speak their truth, of being able to call out powerful men, of being able to really claim all this space. It is, I've realized that, before Me Too, to me, I just felt like that is something you have to put up with. So I walked away from Hollywood because of a Hollywood producer who felt that he absolutely had the right to have sex with me if I wanted to be an actress. I have definitely felt like my career was derailed in telecommunications due to sexual harassment because the man that owned the company was trying to come on to me at the Christmas party. It's just, it has colored my life really in a lot of ways that I didn't even realize. I've had my eye on incest and rape. I wasn't looking at sexual harassment and how that derailed my career over and over and over again. So I've had an opportunity to get angry, and I'm really glad that women are being angry. I think women need to have that anger to help them rise up into a powerful place in themselves. And it's important that we call out all of this stuff. It really is. The limitations, though, I think we're going to talk about that in the next question, so maybe I won't even address that right now, but I'll just stay focused on the positive stuff. The solidarity that this has created for women, too, to really get that we are sharing this, because I'll tell you, Tomer, women have borne a lot of shame around this. Each woman has felt like it was just happening to her and there must be something wrong with her to be treated this way. And women are not feeling any shame anymore. They are feeling righteously angry and very empowered. and I think united with each other around this common dilemma that we want to change. That's my time.
I think what was positive about the Me Too movement is that it raised awareness and it created enough of a social pressure, like to shift the ground and depose, let's say, depose tyrants, so to speak. Okay, if like I don't think a lot of people knew about Harvey Weinstein from the get-go, and a lot of them are doing all of this virtue signaling right now about, and after the fact, about how it's wrong and blah 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 blah. But there's a lot of hypocrisy involved with that. People knew, and people didn't address it. But this outcry and the outburst gave people who knew and didn't do something before, for whatever reason, whether it's shame or awe or just conformity, they gave them empowerment to actually raise it up and address it. And there are positive consequences. Harvey Weinstein is in a legal bind, and hopefully he will get his comeuppance. R. Kelly had another documentary made about him, and hopefully that, together with the Me Too, will create enough of an impetus to find enough evidence to bring him to court and bring him to justice and have him receive his punishment, and other places where people abuse their power in order to abuse other people. I think that's definitely very, very positive. And there's value to that, of saying this is not okay, and raising hell. Because if something is a norm in a society, like in Hollywood, the couching couch has been the norm for many, many years. Women have engaged in it as well. There were women who sexually harassed and got sexual favors from men for positions, etc. I think in order to move such a behemoth, there's a certain level of a body already in movement. There's all of this inertia, and you need that big shout out in order to move it. And I think that's a very positive thing that Me Too did.
Yeah, I think maybe we move on to what's not so positive. I don't have anything else to say about that.
Okay.
I pretty well summed it up. Women's empowerment, women's righteous anger, women's bonding, and women healing the shame, so that they realize that this is actually not something about them as an individual. This is something that applies to the culture. And I think that's just an incredibly powerful, important, crucial thing. And I think we're seeing a lot of women now elected into Congress because Me Too. Believe it or not, I think Trump was an affront to a lot of women. And I think that, pussy grabber. And this whole thing really is just women have had it. They're not gonna stand for it anymore. So I think it's awesome, and I'm really glad that it's here. That's the positive stuff that I see.
Okay, so the only thing I'd like to add to that is I think it's positive that it's brought an opportunity to have a conversation that hasn't been being had. Because like I said, society shifted. There was the pill, the sexual revolution, the pill, women's hygiene products, women joining the workforce en masse, and really like the breaking of the barriers, the separation of men and women in social life. So a lot of things changed, but we never actually stopped to have a conversation. If a man has to come in a suit to work, does a woman have to come in a suit? Does she have to come in a professional dress? How high does can the dress climb up? Is she allowed to put rouge and makeup and so forth? Can the man say a compliment about her figure? Et cetera, et cetera. There's all of these conversations that haven't been being had. Setting aside for a second the extreme clear cases of a man abusing his power to get sexual favors from women in exchange for favors that his power can confer, or as a threat, that of punishment that he can induce. That's very clearly something that is not okay, and I'm very happy it came to light. But beyond that, there's just like the day-to-day of the banal of just being in the same space, and what are the rules? Things like, can a male teacher hug his students? And if not, why? That does not make any sense. And women teachers can hug their students, but men can't. There's been plenty of cases of female teachers that sexually assaulted, in essence, had sex with their students. So there's definitely room for conversation, and I'm very glad that Me Too has provided an impetus and an opportunity to have that conversation. And to our next question, the natural. What do you think was negative about the Me Too movement? What are some of the risks related to this movement?
So I guess for me, it's not so much that I find anything negative about Me Too, because I don't actually. But what I see is that it's incomplete, and it's tipped over into blaming and shaming men. So I guess actually I'll retract that. That is something that I find negative about Me Too, is the shaming. To me, to liberate women from the shame is awesome, but then to foist that shame onto men who have perpetrated, to me, is counterproductive. I do not believe that shame creates positive outcomes. I realize that some religions believe there's a proper place for shame. I'm not religious. I don't believe that. I'm kind of from the Brene Brown school of shame, and that is the shame is always a negative thing. I think when people feel guilty, that can motivate them to take positive steps towards change. But if you shame people, it actually is a prescription for reperpetration. When people, the more ashamed people feel, the more they identified they feel with whatever they did, and they're probably going to persist in that behavior. So I don't think we've created a safer society. I think we've created a world that has more shame, and we just foisted it on the other gender. And that to me is a real negative, and there's a potential fallout to that. I think we're already seeing a backlash of some very angry men. We've got men going their own way too, which is, just completely buying out of the whole interaction between men and women. I would like for us to be able to take this conversation to a place that is devoid of shame, to a place where we also are not so gender-centric, because, we've got a lot of people who don't even identify on the gender binary anymore. So having conversations about men and women is kind of also, it's not, forward-thinking. Living in the past when we do that. So Me Too right now is polarized between men and women, and I don't see any way forward through that. And I don't think that ruining people's careers is the way forward either. I don't know about the rape accusation with Neil deGrasse Tyson, and I understand there's going to be an investigation on the part of the networks that host his shows, and I look forward to seeing what the results are. But as far as the sexual harassment charges, to me, that is something that might have taken place between Neil deGrasse Tyson and the women who felt offended. Now, one of those women actually told him and then felt like she had to quit her job. So that's more serious there. The one who's got the thing about her tattoo, I think it would be nice for her to also take some responsibility for not having intercepted the interaction with Neil deGrasse Tyson, and then to write something on the internet about it seems, I don't know, to me, that's not my style. I would rather go talk to the person and let them know, hey, I'm uncomfortable about this. But as far as, so see, we've got like 3 different situations right there. We've got somebody who felt creeped out, somebody who felt sexually harassed on the job, and somebody who claims they were raped. And we've got to start nuancing those. And I don't see that nuance taking place in Me Too either. It's just all being stuck in one bucket.
I think the biggest problem, the biggest negative thing about the Me Too movement is its attempt to dispense with the presumption of innocence, which is a precept of Western law that's been around for a long time and is very, very important. People don't really, the things that work around us are very, very quick with dispensing with them and don't understand the dangers. Because in a world where there isn't a presumption of law, we suspect women for being witches and we throw them into the lake. And if they sink, I guess they were innocent. Too bad. And if they don't sink, we'll take them out and burn them at the stake because they're obviously witches. That's a world without the presumption of innocence. It's the king decides, or whoever decides if you're guilty, and you're guilty. It's Russia and Marxist Russia, where you're guilty just for being alive, and we're going to set you off for a gulag. We're going to torture you until you admit that you're guilty, whatever the circumstances, then you're going to die in a gulag somewhere out far. So people are like so quick to dispense with this, the idea that you have to prove that somebody is guilty before you can punish him. It's so fundamental to our society, and we're so quick to tar and feather him and forget about it. We've had times in America when we were where we rushed to have that court of public the condemn people and punish people. That is not a good place to go to, and I think we have to be very, very careful about that. Very careful. You can't just ruin a person's career and destroy his life without any proof. If there is proof, if there is issue to bring up, it should be brought up. There's a court of law, and you can't ruin people's career, whether it's in college, or whether they're running for office as a judge, or whether they're a public thing. If there's something, you have to raise it, and there's proper places where this can be weighed, and we can discern to the best of our ability where is justice and act accordingly. It's super important to be very, very sensitive about that, because when that goes, society goes. And we're always quick, there's that famous quote from the Holocaust, from World War II. When they came for the Jews, they didn't say anything because it wasn't Jewish. When they came for the gays, they didn't say anything because it wasn't gay. When they came for the mentally retarded, I didn't say anything because it wasn't mentally retarded. When they came for me, there wasn't anybody left to stand up for me. Mm-hmm. That's very, very important. These principles where we value human life and everybody are treated as equal in front of the law, and that there is a rule of law, are very, very important. Beyond that, there's a lot of other things. Like you said, first of all, I think it promotes sexism against men. It promotes this narrative that men are all hostile and all harassing and all dangerous, which I feel is super untrue and super unfair. It's simply sexist. If I would say anything equivalent about women, all of women are promiscuous, all of women are conniving, all of women, because I had an experience with women who were that, people would be up in arms, and for good reason. But people feel free to say all men are sexual harassers, all men are dangerous, all men harass women. I think it's a load of crock. I think some men are. I think there's some room for figuring out the rules and what's cool and what's not cool in society. I think it's simply sexism to put this brush all over men. And I'll leave the rest for next round.
So going back to what's negative about Me Too, I don't see us having a road forward. What I see is right now is that we're kind of building steam and solidarity as women, and we're comparing stories and realizing we have so much in common in the way of being sexually assaulted and harassed and abused, and it's just a beautiful, wonderful thing, but it doesn't in any way, shape, or form seem to bridge the gender gap. It doesn't seem to find some way to actually have a conversation with men that works. And I still very, very strongly believe that we've got a cultural difference, and that men and women are not going to have the same opinions on this topic until we start bridging that cultural divide. And some of the elements of that culture that I see are, first of all, we've got different standards about what sexual harassment is. We've got different standards about what abuse looks like. We've got different standards about what is frightening or scary. We're not living in the same world. So it's almost impossible for us to understand each other. And I get that men feel frightened. I'm talking to a lot of men who feel frightened to do anything, to hold hands, give a hug, ask her out, tell her that her dress looks pretty, initiate a kiss. I'm not saying all men feel that way, but I'm talking to lots of men who do. And the women right now are mostly in a place of pain. They are starting to realize that they were in situations where they were harassed, assaulted, or raped, that they never called that they did not, they took all the shame on, felt bad about themselves, and have lived lives that were less than because of that. They did not fully step into their power as human beings because of sexual assault or harassment or rape. So it's two very different worlds having two different experiences. But I will say this, as I brought men into my workshops to start talking about consent, one of the things that becomes quite apparent is that men have got a lot of abuse in their history as well, that they are pretty much in denial about. So I want the conversation, the Me Too conversation, to start including men. And this is what I've heard some people say, Me Too is for women, and I am absolutely positively opposed to that. I think Me Too needs to be genderless. I think we need to include everybody in Me Too. I think that we're going to find more and more men have also been sexually harassed or assaulted. And as they come out of denial about that, we're going to be able to start connecting as human beings. That's my time.
Yeah, I want to agree perfectly with your last point about how it became a sexist movement, because rather than talking about sexual harassment of humans by other humans, it became a women against men. So there's plenty of women who harass men. There's plenty of men who were harassed or assaulted by men. Male rape is quite the problem in prisons, and there's definitely a lot of underreporting of sexual harassment perpetrated against men. But rather than having that conversation of we want to have a safe society for everybody, the conversation becomes we want to have a safe society for a select group of humans that we decided of. Only women. Men can go fuck themselves. And that's sexist. So you're actually promulgating things you're trying to stand against. You're complaining about women being, not you, but the movement, so to speak, is complaining about women being marginalized, and you're marginalizing men. So you're no better than what you're complaining about. You always have to look in the mirror first. What was that the Jesus thing? I'm Jewish, so I can't bring it to you. He was without sin, may he throw the first stone, something to that effect. It's very important. And I think another problem with the Me Too movement is that it promotes victimhood. The idea that I am a victim, that I have been victimized, that people have taken my rights from me, that's a very problematic state of mind to be in. First of all, historically speaking, that's what you do to a society before you wanted to viciously attack with violence other people. So in Nazi Germany, there was a lot of work in propaganda of convincing the German people how much they were victimized by the French, by the British, by the Jews. The Jews stole from them. In the agreements post-World War I, everything was taken from them. They're victims, and now they're going to lash out against their aggressors. That is every single time in human history when you want to attack viciously some other people, the Jews are drinking our blood, whatever it is, against Muslims, against Christians, time and again. That's what you do. We're victims. They're the aggressors. They're the oppressors. Now we're going to murder them. We're going to right the wrongs. So that's not productive of a safe and respectful society. If you want to discuss about things that can be improved, changed, that is a very positive society, a very positive move. If you want to take agency of your future, that's very positive. But, sometimes you didn't succeed in life because you didn't succeed, because you didn't work hard enough. Or you had bad luck, because that's life. Not everybody always luck out. And it's a bit of a cop-out. I'm not saying it's never true that there were circumstances that made it hard for you. But if you put your results in the hands of some outside oppressor, then the only solution is to attack that oppressor. And that is not a society I want to be a part of.
I think, victim mentality is certainly not a place where I want to live in, victim mentality. And with my clients, I am definitely teaching them how not to be victims. I very much believe in being a survivor and moving on into being somebody who thrives. I want to live in a world where people of all genders can respect each other's personal experiences. And we have to listen more. We have to talk more. We have to share more. We have to stop assuming. We have to stop ascribing to stereotypes. We have to stop categorizing each other by the skin, the color of our skin, or our country of origin, or the religion that we ascribe to, or what kind of genitalia dangle between our legs or don't dangle between our legs. We just really have got to evolve away from this. We need to be more heart-centered. We need to be more focused on compassion, empathy, love. We need to move away from shame. That is an old paradigm that's outlived its usefulness for the human species. And I want to see the Me Too movement morph into something that includes all genders, includes all pain, includes empowerment, isn't staying in a place of being a victim. And that has to be nuanced, because I realize that when peoples have been oppressed, we've got to be sensitive to that oppression. But certainly I see personally that any population that feels victimized seems to then translate that, or often does translate that, to permission to abuse others. And death row is full of victims. People who were victimized and did the best they could, and it's somebody else's fault that they're there. So we have to hold individuals accountable for their behavior, but it is a two-way street. I want us to have conversations about how female culture lacks proper assertion, which, not to harp on this book that I'm writing, but that's why I want to teach people how to say a no that creates intimacy, because I think that when we have that skill set, we're more likely to say no. Too often, women are trying to maintain connection at the expense of their own boundaries, and then they regret it later. And I'm not saying that they aren't also victimized by somebody taking advantage of a lack of boundaries. But again, we've got to nuance this conversation. There's so many different kinds of Me Too moments. We've got everything from brutal rapes to somebody rubbing your back at work. And until we nuance that conversation and start talking about all of these Me Too moments as the different things that they are, I don't even see how we can have an intelligent discussion about how to move forward, because we're conflating rape and flirtation and sexual advances that are creeping us out. So that's all I got to say right this minute.
Yeah, you kind of edge into our last question. I'm going to still address the issue of the negative things. I agree with a lot of things that you said. I think the shaming is definitely negative. I don't think it's productive in any way, shape, or fashion. There has to be a conversation, not an attack and a lashing out. And you talked about MGTOW, about men checking out, and like, we're not going to be dating women or engaging with women anymore. There's also like, before that, there's professional repercussions. When people develop professionally, a lot of times there's some kind of mentor over there on the way that helped them step up, that gave them guidance. And a lot of men in positions of power choose these days, I understand, not to mentor women anymore, because it's not worth the fucking risk. It's like, why would I expose myself to the danger of being this close to a woman who has potential and I'd like to succeed, but it could all go back on me and ruin my professional life. And people have lives, responsibilities, desires. So men are choosing not to help women climb up because of the toxic culture that Me Too has brought to the fore of it's enough to accuse a man and dispense with the presumption of innocence, and you've ruined his life effectively. So that's also something to consider. And I think the last thing and the most important is that you raise it to it belittles the actual, when you indiscriminately paint everything the same brush and you try to paint things black and white. Me too. I've also, somebody patted my back. And I'm not saying there isn't room to have a conversation of that. I'm saying that's not a Harvey Weinstein case. You know, and if you put Harvey Weinstein and somebody patted my back in the same basket, you've just belittled what happened to a victim of Harvey Weinstein or a victim of, what was that black comedian who drugged and raped girls?
Bill Cosby.
Bill Cosby. You put a victim of Bill Cosby who was drugged and raped, a child, in the same bowl with somebody whose back was patted and felt uncomfortable about it. I'm sorry, but it's not the same. And it's important to actually have a conversation and differentiate the two in order to be able to deal with each one appropriately. Some crimes merit capital punishment, whether you believe it or not. It's a discussion to have, but for argument's sake, some things merit, I don't know, a fine, and some things merit a capital punishment. And if you have the one punishment for everything, then you're not going to have a functioning society. I think this is a great opportunity to move to our last and summarizing question. And that question is going to be, what is the next steps? What do you think would be a positive evolution, continuation? How can we use the momentum, the things that Me Too brought up, and actually move it into positive ways? Take the positive, let go of the negative, and actually use this to benefit society in general, men, women, and everybody else, however they see themselves.
We've got to have a sharing of perspective. We've got to start communicating with each other about our different cultural perspectives. You know, if you want to call those gender perspectives, you can. I frankly, I like it better when we call them cultural perspectives because we're less entrenched and attached to our viewpoint. And I think when we look at it as a culture, then we can start to be curious about the other one's perspective. And is there something I want to borrow from that? Is there something that I want to enlarge my world through that perspective? And if men and women and people of all genders are starting to share their different perspectives about sexual harassment, about flirting, about courtship, about romance, about on all the things that we've talked about, and my God, it's such a big spectrum here, but about consent, that if we're all engaged in that conversation, it's going to be a richer conversation, and it's going to help us move forward to a shared vision and a common vision. And we have to evolve as a species. We have to evolve to be more intuitive, more empathetic, more nuanced. We've got to stop seeing sex as a competition or a game or some way to somehow or another outsmart or outfox another person. And I'm talking about both sides, by the way, because certainly people of all genders can treat the dating mating game as kind of a zero-sum game. Like somebody's going to win and somebody's going to lose. I think we need to start moving towards partnership, more of a partnership model. Do we want to relate to each other sexually? And if so, how? How can all of us feel seen, heard, respected, loved, safe in that soup? So while Me Too is foisting a lot of shame and blame on men, it first started that shame and blame was foisted on the heads of women. Women were blamed for their own rapes. They were blamed for men's perpetrations. And it only makes sense that it has backfired now as women have obtained more rights and more voice, that they're finally calling this out. I'm frankly shocked that it took this long to get here, but it did. But it's not a final resting place. To go forward, we have to stop fighting a war. We have to stop throwing the shame and the blame back and forth between men and women and start seeing each other as brothers and sisters, start seeing each other as having a common desire for human connection and human society. I think that requires us to honor all of our pain. And there is pain on every side here. You know, the other day, something came to me that every sense of entitlement, I'm just going to say this before, every sense of entitlement behind that is a sense of deprivation, a sense of doing without. No, my time's up.
I feel like the first and foremost thing to take from it in order to really build a positive momentum is conversation. I mean, that's always my bias. This is our channel, Roundtable Conversations. I feel like ultimately always the solution is to treat people respectfully and to listen to them and to listen to each other and to actually have a conversation where you create a shared pool of meaning. Men put theirs in, women put theirs in, everybody puts in their meaning, what they're concerned about, what their values are. And we sit around this common pool and we grow from it, we draw from it, and you have to have some maturity for that. And I think that's one of the greatest things about the 21st century. I think society in general is moving towards a more mature place. There's back and forth and there's a lot of room to grow, but ultimately I think society today is gradually maturing. But again, it's always, there's this thin veneer of, underneath which is the person who wants to burn everybody else at the stake and lash out. And it's very important to be conservative about dispensing and breaking down structures that keep civilized society in place, presumption of innocence, etc. We've discussed these things. I think conversation, respecting individuals, actually having a conversation about it now. How are we going to live in shared spaces? What are the rules of engagement these days? Marriage used to be the structure in the Western world that kept people together and that everything revolved around. And today it's kind of at a decline. So that's a conversation we need to have. A lot of people's answer is, people get married. And that's a point of view that has some room to be discussed. And also there's room to discuss about people who that's not the solution for them and they want to do something else. But again, we have to have a discussion of what are the rules of engagement. I'll be the first to applaud all the attempts to remove oppression. I think the fact that Harvey Weinstein is on the way behind bars, that forgot the name of that comedian you mentioned.
Bill Cosby.
Yeah, that he's behind bars. I think it's fantastic. I hope all the other perpetrators, I hope they get the comeuppance and we get rid of them. There's no two ways about it. And the women who've done it as well. But beyond that, I think the vast majority of people are well-meaning and just want to get along properly in society together. And I think what we need to do is be respectful of each other, that we see things differently, and that my truth isn't necessarily the truth, and try to understand the other person's point of view as well, and try to reach a shared common pool of meaning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we've summed it up.
Rock and roll then.
Yeah. Come together and have conversations. Learn to listen. Learn to share.
Yes, this is. I feel every time we have this wound revealed, whether it's Me Too or whether it's feelings of oppression that the Black community has in the United States, or differences of opinion about the death penalty, or whether it's differences of opinion about abortion, pro-life or pro-choice, people get very aggressive and demonizing about it. You want to destroy the other person, destroy the other point of view, bring him down and show yourself right. And I think it's important to remember each other's humanity. What the fabric that holds our society together is this idea that individuals are valuable. Individuals are valuable. That's a very deep idea. And there's a saying in Hebrew, every man is a small world. Every person is a small world. And I think it's important to remember that and listen to each other to see where they're coming from and try to reach a shared point of view. I think just the listening 80% of the time resolves the issue.
Well, I once again want to say, I want to teach people how to say no in a way that creates heart connection. This to me is about bringing a more feminine culture into the discussion. So we're not just having a hard no or something like that. I don't think that's really the way that women deal with each other or others. And this particular pattern is really great for couples too, because oftentimes men are doing things that they don't want to do. You'd be surprised how many guys talk to who have sex when they don't want to. So, so being able to say no and creating more connection with another human being is essential. And that's just part of my contribution to this whole Me Too thing.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. I feel like we both could move towards each other. Men towards women and women towards men. It'll be a better world out for it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I think that's a beautiful summary for our roundtable conversation about hashtag Me Too. I'll post links. Do you have any material about that program that you're doing online?
Yeah, actually I do. I'll send you the link.
So I'll post a link below in the description if anybody's interested to see what Veronica has to offer. They can find out.
Great.
And if you have any questions, comments, suggestions, please leave them below. And have a beautiful, blessed day.
Yeah. Bye, everybody.